topic is open data, whether it is necessity or a threat. But before I'll ask this question, maybe let us think for a couple of minutes or discuss what open data actually is. Katarzyna, if we may start with you. I know you had a long way from Singapore to reach Katowice, but if you could share your vision on open data, what is it?
Open data very often is confused, or people, they don't see the difference between open data and big data. And this is actually two different things. So open data is, to me, or to work I am doing, is data which are publicly available, and these are the data about the public. And the data should be open in terms of like technically and legally. Technically means that you can use it. Any person who wants to use it can open and can access the data and can check the data. And legally meaning that there should be a license to the data, how we can use it, who can use it. Okay, but
going one step back, what data are we talking about? Is it transportation data? Is it data how we are moving, or?
Can be. I mean, open data can be any data which is related to public, to people who are living in cities or countries. It can be related specifically to the transportation. Then we can think of the data like how people are moving across the cities, how they are choosing their transportation mode, what their preferences are, how the vehicles are moving through the cities.
Okay, Augustin, you are dealing with driving analytics. What data is value for you, for DriveQuant, and what can it deliver?
Yeah, just before answering that, I just wanted to come back to the purpose of open data, just to make sure, because why do we want that? It's actually to put some fairness into the field. It's make sure that everyone has access to the same data, and there is no competitive advantage gathering collective data. So it's giving it back to the community so that we can leverage on it and make the most of it. At DriveQuant, I mean, we look at different type of data, and that's actually our expertise is in trying to make most of data, even though when it's really limited. What we look at the minimum, it's GPS information, and rather speed and direction, and from that we're gonna apply some model, and we can estimate some pollutant or some safety, and all that information we try to make it. So open data for us will be what we have as an input, and we can use a lot of them, but it's also what we take from it, because the idea is not to take it and just keep it for itself. It's to work on it and give it back to the community.
I can extend even, if I can.
Yeah, go ahead, of course.
It's very important that open data is not something like specific to a person, and it's not a private information. It's something we can use as a company or as a government, and then make cities, in the case of the transportation, better.
Okay, Michael, what would be your view on open data?
I think it clearly shows already in the past that open data, if you look at London, if you look at New York, has spurred a lot of innovation. If you look at the app stores, you see many apps providing journey planning, providing information about mobility in London, and that was all sort of based on open data. So I think that's something which is really good, and it's been already an achievement in the past. We have been working, and we are working a lot with public transport operators in Austria, Germany, and in the beginning they were very hesitant to say, okay, because they don't want to open the data, because they're afraid that people have a detailed look at what they're doing, they might find errors, they might find bad quality, and it comes back to them in a bad way. So we help them to sort of get over this burden. And we are, for example, operating a public data platform for the city of Vienna, for the public transport operator, and it really has sort of been one really important element, and it actually came back to them because they started to do some internal activities to improve the quality of data. So in the end, it's not only about giving it away, but also it's about learning yourself in your organization and improving the way how you digitize your organization.
Okay, before I ask you about the possible benefits to the society or whoever else resulting from open data, we do have a few questions coming from the audience. If you're interested, you can have a look on the screen here. Yeah, open data means democracy nowadays. Isn't open data opening public transport to be hacked by North Korea? How about the risk of open fake data? So we do see, I think here from these questions, I do see some constraints, whether opening data is safe, secure, whether it can possibly have some negative consequences. So maybe first I'll ask you about the possible benefits. Later on we'll go touch upon these topics of possible risks and constraints, okay? Katarzyna, if we may start with you, also with some focus on what NuTonomy is doing, because this is about autonomous fleets of vehicles, right?
Yes, that's correct. We're working on building software for autonomous vehicles, for mobility on demand with autonomous vehicles. So we're actually running a couple of public demonstrations in Singapore and in the US, in Vegas, in Boston, and we are providing transportation service to people. And for us, open data is a very important tool to learn how people react, how people decide on the public or taking the transportation. And as an example, I am operating a fleet of autonomous vehicles and comparing it to a fleet of autonomous manually driven taxis. Then we have data in Singapore, open data, which are traces of all the taxis across the city. And then we can optimize our service and see how much better it is or how much worse it is. So in our case, we could improve the transportation in the city by on average 30% less waiting time for customers. So we see a clear benefit of making use of the open data, and the data are provided by the government. There is a like, how do you call it, a portal on the website, which is on the, they call it data mall on the government website. So you trust the data. It's like responding to one of those questions. So you are sure that those data are not fake.
Okay, improved transportation from the user's perspective, and as well as from the city
operator and from the operator
perspective. So I see there is a win-win-win.
Yes, that's what we see.
Right? The operator, the user, and the administration, if I may. Augustin, what do you think the benefits? What benefits can be delivered? Maybe let's start with this one.
The benefit that can be delivered is actually that with open data, you make sure that the best in each class actually have access to your data and they work on it. The idea is that if we take a company or specific local government, they don't have the knowledge and the capacity to treat the data in many ways. So I'll take an example, the one of one app that you probably already all know, which is City Mapper, that has started in the UK. And actually, that app, which basically is a journey planner based on multimodal transportation, it was answering to a lack, the fact that the TfL didn't have a great app and people didn't really use it. They were struggling with it, and they said, okay, I'm going to do a user-friendly app and make it better. And actually, they succeed to do it better. And the good thing is actually TfL is trying to catch up with it. So there is an emulation with it. So it's just to make sure that everyone looks at it and make the most of it. And the second thing also, I think it's useful, and also for the public administration, is that actually open data, what we've seen, one indirect benefit is that the data is accessible all over the administration, and it circulates more easily because it's formatted and readily available. So everyone in the administration can use it, and in the end, it reduces the cost of operating that data.
Okay, Michael, what benefits could you, or Fluidtime, the service you are managing, deliver to the?
I think from the Fluidtime perspective, what we're working on is standardization of data in the mass ecosystem. Because what we see is if it go beyond public transport, sorry, and you add other transport modalities, you have basically a plethora, a huge sort of mess of data, and that's really what we do. And any type of open data and any type of standardization is helping our work on a daily basis. Most of the hours spent in our company is about managing data and preparing it in a way that others can use it properly. So I think that's something where we directly benefit from it. But you also see that public administration or public operators benefit, because more and more they see, they may be good in operation, they may be good in government and regulation, but often they have a difficulty to manage all the end customer relationships. And in the end, about mobility is about customer experience. And by publishing open data in a high quality, will allow a city to have several apps targeting different target groups in the proper way. So they can basically stick to their main and core business and have others, have innovative companies come in and do the part where it's really about relationships to customers. So I see also benefit of supporting a mobility ecosystem through open data.
Okay, so the clear benefit here is like improved mobility, improved user experience, and improved quality of life. I think Vienna is a good example, always on top ranked with regards to quality of life. On the screen you can see actually many doubts whether open data is safe, secure. Do you think constraints such as, I don't know, unauthorized access to the data, fake data I can see here, even using the data by terrorists, also GDPR, like privacy issues. Do you see some of these constraints with regards to open data as showstoppers for the development?
I would say in terms of fake data, the possibility of terrorists accessing the data or any misuse of the data, there is a risk, of course, but that's more a philosophical question, I would say. It's whether you put the data available to someone, because there is a risk that a small number may leverage on it. But in terms of fake data, there is a risk, but there is a need of someone supervising it. And there's one good example also that we all know, which is Wikipedia. Wikipedia is open data, and at the beginning there was some struggle because a lot of fake documents were happening. And over the time, we stop hearing that limitation, because basically people now, they are reviewing everything that is processed. And that's what happened also with data. When you put data on open data, it's just, you don't throw your data. You need to format, someone needs to format it. So by formatting it, you need to review it. So there are processes to spot irregularities, and that's where you need to edit the data. So within the process, it's something that is needed. And in terms of limitation in the access, by definition, open data has no limitation to the access. Everyone should be able to access it anytime they want. So that's not something.
Okay, Katarzyna, are there any? Michael, you wanted to add something?
I'm not sure if you give away, if you know the position of a bus, or if you know how the taxis are driving in Singapore, if that's relevant for a terrorist sort of project. Yeah. So typically, open data, at least that what we come across in the mobility context, is not that sensitive. So we're not talking about private data. We're not talking about access to sort of the control centers of transport operators. It's more about the planning part, or it's more about how people have been traveling in the past. So I don't see it in that sense critical in that regard.
Okay. Speaking of autonomous vehicles, it may be a question. There are many constraints about autonomous vehicles. Who's going to take decision? How the car should be going, or in terms of accidents and so on. What about open data with regards to autonomous fleets? Do you see any constraints or risks in that particular field?
There are risks, like the questions probably on the board, but in terms of Singapore, we are actually required by the government to provide the locations of our car all the time, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So government collects all the data from taxis, buses, private vehicles, as well as autonomous vehicles, and then you can request access to the data. And the government, of course, can get you the access or can say that no, decline the access to the person.
Okay, so there is a managing authority of the data in Singapore.
So in Singapore, it's open data. So by open data, you actually mean that you can request the access to the data. And there is another question whether the government gives you the access to the data or what kind of data government allows you to look at.
Okay,
I think it's always important to separate the operational part. The operational, how you operate sort of a autonomous fleet or any other sort of mobility operations, and that's something which can't be open. Because
yes, exactly.
of course, you have high security issues, personality issues, and so on. But then there's another layer on top that can be made public, which is about past activities or about planned activities, and I think here it makes a lot of sense, of course, to publish that.
So we actually publish the real-time locations of positions of all the vehicles. We don't have to publish what algorithm do we use, what's the battery status of the car, or whatever other technical details. It's just the positions of all the vehicles, so people can maybe better optimize the transportation system within the city.
Okay, because we only have like 3 minutes left. If you could name some, we've heard about London, we've heard about Singapore, maybe Vienna. Do you know some good examples of open data being properly used with benefits to the society whether by businesses or city administration?
I think Manhattan is the best example. So New York released the taxi data across the entire island of Manhattan, and then there is tons of research done on the data sets, how we can improve actually the transportation operation within Manhattan. So I would say this is a great example.
Okay, Manhattan, one of the examples. Augustin, any other?
Sorry, I'm going to be redundant, but I'll go back to CityMapper because there's a good example with CityMapper is that first they were consuming data provided by public authority, but they came to a stage where now they're providing information and they do experiments with those same public government because they now have some open buses running into London, and that will help the city of London to define the gap in their network and create some new lines. So I think it's a really good example of what open data can achieve.
Okay, Michael, any other cities or locations you would like to advertise?
An example on the edge. The city of Vienna started to publish data. One of the first apps that came out was the toilet app. And it basically was an app giving you information where's the next public toilet. And there are certain people who really have a need to find, when they're walking through the city, they need to find toilets. So it's maybe a very specific case, but I think it shows that on the edge of public data, there's some innovations or services that are coming up that are targeting maybe a small group of users, but for them it is really a precious element. And I think the government would never ever publish such an app because it just doesn't make sense, because it doesn't cover 80% of the population. But through open data this can be made possible. So this was one of the apps in Austria that was talked a lot about.
Okay. Maybe just to wrap up our discussion, I think a thing very important to mention is the exchange of data, actually. We have different stakeholders, different parties, groups of interests, and actually data can't go only one way, only one direction, right? It has to be some sort of an exchange. What's your view? We only have a few, not even a minute left, but if you could briefly address this topic, exchange of data.
They need to have a incentive to help people to provide the data, because providing the data is also hosting the data, so it's a cost. So we need to make sure that everyone that participates gets something in return.
Okay, Augustin would like to incentivize people for providing data. That's
yes.
Good one. Katarzyna?
Singapore enforces.
Enforces, a totally different approach. Michael?
I just say if there's value in exchanging data, people will be more willing and you don't have to push them. They will have a pull factor.
Okay, perfect. As you see, there are different approaches. I think we will leave you with this point. Thanks very much for the attention. Thanks to my panelists, Augustin, Katarzyna, Michael, and I wish you a perfect rest of the day.